Continuing with our lecture on photosynthesis, we will get into some details on the actual process of photosynthesis and what's happening during photosynthesis. So there are 2 stages in photosynthesis instead of the 3 stages of cell respiration. It's a little bit more simplistic. The first stage is where light is used and harvested, and so we'll see how light is used to make ATP and another molecule called NADPH. So we've seen ATP, that's the cell energy molecule. NADPH is very similar to NADH. In fact, it serves the same function. It's an electron carrier. It has an extra phosphate group, so it's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. And it holds electrons. And because plants have chloroplasts and they have mitochondria, and they'll have some both NADH and NADPH, it kind of differentiates where those electrons are used. But just think of it as an electron carrier. And those are created in the light reactions. And then in the Calvin cycle, those energy molecules are combined with enzymes and carbon dioxide, and the plant builds up a sugar. Okay, so we're going to go into just a little bit of detail, not as much detail as we saw with cell respiration though. Here's the light-dependent reactions. The very first start of photosynthesis is water being split by an enzyme to pull electrons out. Okay, so the very first step, we generate oxygen in photosynthesis. And the electrons come out and are energized by sunlight. Okay, so the sunlight energy is absorbed in those electrons, and then we use these high energy electrons to produce ATP and NADPH. That's where the electrons end up. All right, this is like a good picture of the process, and it just represents what's happening. I love this picture. Photons, right, hit a photosystem, which is a protein complex that's in the thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast, right, those flattened stacks. And they have proteins in them. And one of the protein complexes is called photosystem 2. And that has chlorophyll, and that has enzymes around that split water. And then the chlorophyll absorbs light, and the light energy gets put into the electrons from water. So oxygen's generated, the electrons jump in energy from the absorption that the pigments have of the light. They get put into electrons. Those electrons pass through the membrane of those thylakoid membranes, and protons move across. Protons move back through an ATP synthase. So it's like the electrons are losing energy to generate ATP in a very similar manner that happens that we saw in cell respiration. Those electrons are carried to a second protein photosystem, and there's more pigments in that photosystem, and sunlight strikes there. The light energizes the electrons even further, and then these electrons end up in the molecule NADPH, which of course starts off as NADP+, and then the electrons combine with the hydrogen, and we get NADPH. So during the light reactions, we've split water for electrons. Oxygen's produced. Those electrons get energized by light in a photosystem. They're used to make ATP. They get energized by light in another photosystem, and then they end up in NADPH. So we've created electron carriers, we've created ATP, and we've created oxygen. Now, the oxygen diffuses out. That's a byproduct, right? And then the NADPH and the ATP are in the fluid called the stroma. And enzymes are in the fluid. and they'll use ATP for energy, and they'll use electrons, and they'll connect carbon dioxides together with electrons to build sugar. And we don't need to see any more details of that, but that's what's happening. Okay. And this actually is the last slide for the lecture. So we'll have water. This is just a kind of an overview of everything that has happened in photosynthesis. So here's the chloroplast. In the thylakoids, we have light striking the photosystem. The light's harvested by the pigment and gets put into the electrons from water. During that process, ATP is made. The electrons get put into NADPH. Oxygen's generated. In the fluid, you have enzymes. The enzymes take these energy molecules, connect carbon dioxide, and then they'll build sugars from that. And that's the magical process of photosynthesis.